But look at him. There he is in all of his glory on the screen right in front of us. Voice of your Seattle Mariners, Aaron Goldsmith is with us on the Emerald Queen Casino Sportsbook Hotline. How are you, man?
Hey, doing great. How are you guys doing?
We're doing great. Where are you? Are you at home?
I'm at home.
Okay.
Where are you?
We're in the studio. I'm just looking at the background. It almost looks like you're in a like a card store with collectibles behind you. You got a wall full of baseballs, and it looks pretty cool. I like the visual there.
Yeah, I put all my best stuff right behind my shoulder. That's the best we have right there.
All right. Well, good to talk to you, man, as we are just a couple of weeks away from spring training and want to get your thoughts on this team as they head that way. And we'll see what if there are any more moves, but they just made the move to reacquire Jorge Polanco yesterday, which I thought was interesting. He's going to apparently be the third baseman. He's a guy looking up his numbers. He's had 20 starts at third base in his career, so not a natural position for him. What were you surprised by that? Had you heard, I don't know, whispers about them potentially bringing him back? What's your reaction to that move?
I did not see Polanco rejoining the team as something that would necessarily happen, but when you consider where the Mariners are, they needed a third baseman, and yeah, I'm not exactly sure what that will look like at third and what how his arm will play on the other across the diamond on the other side. But he is somebody who, although last year did not go as well as anyone had hoped that it would for Jorge, think back to like almost a year ago right now, everyone was ecstatic when the Mariners were able to swing a trade to bring Jorge Polanco to Seattle, a guy who had a really good track record of success as a hitter in the major leagues and an experienced veteran who been part of some really good Twins teams. And last year, I think you kind of hoped that the knee was more of an issue than maybe the club let on during the season. Obviously, Polanco was on the injured list, so we knew that it was a problem. But maybe with the healthy, which he had cleaned up early on in the offseason, that helps him come back and be a better hitter and more the kind of hitter that we saw from afar in Minnesota. And you hope that he can play competent third base, certainly, but the Mariners are in a position where they need some offense, and I think they're hoping, obviously, for a bounce-back year from Polanco.
Yeah, as far as the rest of the infield shapes up, how do you see it? Because I'm looking at it going, all right, is it going to be a Dylan Moore, Ryan Bliss platoon at second and a Luke Raley, Solano platoon at first? Is that, I mean, I'm guessing here, they haven't said as much, but it just seems logical that's how it would go until, I don't know, maybe Bliss becomes a star and owns that spot. We'll see. But how do you see the rest of the infield shaping up?
It does seem like Solano and Raley over at first base, and Solano's a veteran who's spent time DHing as well, so that could be an option if you need to fill that spot here and there. You know, at second base, it does seem like it's Dylan Moore right now. I'll be really curious kind of how they handle Ryan Bliss in this whole situation. We saw last year when he came up, and he was with the Mariners in the grand scheme of things for a fairly short period of time, but being a young player, you want to get him regular at-bats, and that was a large part of the reason why he was ultimately sent back to Tacoma, because he just was not getting regular at-bats by and large in the big leagues. And I would imagine that philosophy would hold true in 2025. Where does that put him if Dylan Moore is at second base regularly and you have Polanco over at third? I'm not sure exactly how that will shape up. I'm sure the Mariners are still high on Ryan Bliss, but also they don't want him just sitting for 3, 4, maybe even 5 days at a time. So I'll be curious how Bliss and Dylan Moore and all that shapes up for the infield moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I like Dylan Moore. I like him on the team. I think he serves obviously a huge role on this team. Having said that, I don't think he's an everyday player. And I think when we saw him in the lineup as often as we did, you kind of saw diminishing returns with him. So I mean, do you believe that they look at him as an option as an everyday second baseman, or because I've been viewing it as more of a platoon, but it sounds like you're a little more hesitant on Bliss being part of that, at least initially.
Well, I understand why you say that, and I think, not to put words in your mouth, Bob, but I think what you're saying is like we know what Dylan Moore is,
yeah.
Right? We know what he is, and you can be a championship caliber team with Dylan Moore on your roster and with Dylan Moore impacting your roster. But I think based on the pieces they have right now, that's probably your best option. Now, you could spin it another way and say, we want to see what Ryan Bliss has to offer. We know what Dylan Moore is. We want to see what Ryan Bliss is. So now are you putting Dylan Moore in a utility spot where we know he can play every infield position because we've seen it with our own eyes for years, right? He's the longest tenured Mariner. We have a bigger sample size on Dylan Moore than basically any other player in uniform for the Mariners. So does that mean that Dylan Moore on opening day is on your bench and Ryan Bliss is at second base? I don't know. But I think from the pool of candidates right now, Dylan Moore is certainly your most experienced at second base, and I would say he very possibly could be your best defender for what that is worth at that position as well. For any young player like Ryan Bliss, right? We saw it for a week-long stretch last year. He was on fire in that Cleveland-Miami series. He was dynamite. But like any young player, you can blink your eyes and find yourself underwater for a week and a half, because it's really hard making the adjustment. So all that remains up in the air, at least from what I know right now.
Who are you most curious about going into this next season in terms of what to expect from them? I mean, you got a number of guys that underperformed last year. We're just talking offense. I'm curious about the Mitches, both Haniger and Garver. I'm curious about Julio, if he can be more consistent beginning to end, if JP can bounce back. So I got a lot of curiosity going into this one. Is there somebody you're sort of targeting that you're anxious to see how they're gonna show in this upcoming season?
What's interesting about the 2025 Mariners is it's less of a story of I wonder what this guy can be, and more of a story of we've seen what this guy can be. Can he be that guy again and for a full season? Right? We've all seen every player in this lineup, whether it be in a Mariners uniform or in another team's uniform. We've all seen those players. I think it's fair to say each and every one of them perform at worst an average to an above average to superstar level, right? If you're looking at the peak of Julio to what we saw 2 years ago from JP to what we saw 2 years ago from Mitch Garver in Texas. So like we've seen them all do it individually at different times. Can they do it in unison now? And can they avoid the valleys? Because I think when you look at the Mariners for years now at this point, it has been a team of great extremes. And the highs have been magical and the lows have been utterly maddening, right? And we all know both ends of that spectrum, and we can kind of go back in our memory and think of like the August from 2 years ago, or that 15-game winning streak, or times where the Mariners look like they're the worst offensive team in baseball because they might be for a week or two at a time. Can the Mariners find a way to raise the floor and avoid the dark side of the moon? Because that is what has cost them. If you think about in the last, you tell me, in the last 6 years, right? The Mariners have missed the playoffs 5 times by a combined, how many games? A handful of games. Like, if you add it all up, right? Well, if they could find a way to just be more consistent and avoid that, whatever it was, 10 and 17 month, all of a sudden you find yourself in the wild card, right? So that's happening because it's happened to so many individuals. We've seen so many individuals for the Mariners run really hot and really cold, right? Like Dylan Moore had I think it was a monster month of May last year, right? We know what Julio has done in the back half of the season. Cal has generally been pretty steady Eddie. Luke Raley last year, massive highs, and then at other times had some really tough months. Now for Luke in particular, when it all came out of the wash, it was a dynamite season. It was better than you could have even hoped for Luke Raley. But I think overall we've seen that, and I don't know what the answer is. If the Mariners knew what the answer was, they would have done it by now. I know you guys have talked on your program. They want to give guys more at-bats in spring training to try to get more of a running start, I suppose, into the regular season. And maybe that's the answer. We'll find out. But can you raise the floor and avoid those really, really deep valleys that have put the Mariners in some pretty big holes month to month over the course of the last few years now?
How are you feeling about the offseason? It's been odd in that there's been almost no activity. It's Solano and bringing back Polanco, and that a couple of acquisitions of guys that have been DFA'd, and some additions to the bullpen, which I always, even if I look at the numbers of some of the arms and go, this guy's got a 5.5 ERA. He's not. Mariners just seem the Midas touch with the bullpen arms. They bring in a Justin Topa or Paul Sewald. People you don't even hear from or hear of, and they turn into just crucial members of the bullpen. So those I won't dismiss. But just in terms of addressing the biggest problem with this team, which is offense, so far their answer has been Solano and Polanco, and I don't know if they've got another move up their sleeve or not, but do you look at that and feel like that's enough? Or do you feel like, you know what, you need another impact bat? It'd be great if everybody on the roster, as we talked about, played up to the back of the baseball card. I don't know if everybody's going to do that in unison, as you said. So I would love to see them acquire another bat. I kind of feel like maybe they're not going to, though. But what's your reaction just overall to how they've addressed the offense in the offseason here?
Yeah, I mean, based on the budget that's been pretty public, it seems unlikely that they would add another bat, certainly an impactful one, unless it was, barring a substantial trade of some kind. I think we all kind of knew going into the winter that one of two things would happen, right? The Mariners would trade a starting pitcher and receive some type of haul back of either an MLB ready or a big league proven hitter. But you'd have to be dipping from your great strength, which of course is your rotation, or it would be a series of kind of smaller moves. And obviously it's been the latter that's happened. And maybe that's an okay thing. Time will tell. I think no matter what the Mariners did, and we knew that the Mariners were not going to be getting Pete Alonso or Alex Bregman or the like. But no matter what they did, no matter how big or small, no matter how realistic or fantastical it was that we could have dreamt on, the biggest difference for the Mariners in 2025 will be the players that were in that clubhouse last year. And I don't know if fans hear that and they get upset by that or they find hope in that. You have to have those guys do what you know they can do. And not to beat the drum on what I've already said, but I think that's the key to the season. And you just have to have players who can perform better. And that was a major problem last year, and it's been an issue at times for the Mariners, and they're not alone. It's a hard game. Hitting's very hard, but the Mariners have had a almost like a groupthink mentality of it. When one guy starts to go, a lot of guys start to go, and I'm not trying to say that there's a reason for that, but that's just kind of what happened last year. And I think you hope that Mitch Garver can't have a year like that again. J.P. Crawford isn't going to have a year like that again. He'll stay healthy. Is that wishing on a prayer? I can understand why I might feel that way. But on the other hand, these are guys that, by and large, have a track record. And you hope that that comes to fruition this year and that it won't play out like it did again last year. And I do think that there is some reality to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, if these guys played to the back of their card, didn't exceed what they've done, just been close to who they've been throughout their career, it's a playoff team last year. But problem was, it was sort of a collective fail. Yeah.
Yes, and the other thing too, though, I think we overlook sometimes, and I'm guilty of it too, and that is you look at the end of the season and how great the offense was, particularly in September, and there's no doubt there was an Edgar effect to that. It would be inappropriate to overlook Edgar's influence, but it also was the best lineup that they put out there every day. Mm-hmm. I mean, you had your best, healthiest lineup, and you had Victor Robles playing truly like a top 5 position player in the game for a month. And you had Randy Arozarena playing like a well above average hitter for a month. And Julio being Julio again. I mean, like, it was all happening, right? And you had two people in particular, the two corner outfielders, who were massive influences that you did not have for the first, whatever it was, 3.5 months. So that's a big factor as well. You now will have a full season of those two guys. I don't think Victor Robles is going to perform like the starting right fielder for the American League All-Star game for 6 months like he did for a couple of months last year. And that's not no knock on Victor. That's just a pretty high bar to have. But obviously, even if he regressed from what was just a peak couple of months as a Mariner, that's still a really good player who will help the Mariners win games on a nightly basis.
Yeah, Aaron, I think you know, and Mariner fans, their agitation, their urgency, their frustrations, all revolves around this rotation. 1 through 5, the Mariners have never had a rotation like this in their history. You got 5 guys who are 1s and 2s essentially in any other rotation for the most part. So it's a really unique position to be in. And in baseball terms, they're cheap. outside of Luis Castillo. They're costing them little to nothing in base dollars. So it feels like you got this window, and it's not going to be there long because they've been healthy, they're inexpensive, and they're wildly effective. And it feels like, man, you got to strike while this iron is hot before somebody moves on, somebody gets traded, somebody gets hurt, somebody, it just feels like this is a real precious time, if you will, to take advantage of. And I think that's where the frustration comes in, that we're blowing it. We're not jumping on this while you've got it, because the idea of all 5 of those guys remaining in that rotation and remaining healthy and paid, that's not realistic.
I agree with everything you just said. I mean, yes. There's no doubt. I think that's to all jokes aside, like that's the undercurrent of everything that we just talked about before you mentioned that, right? Obviously, there's frustration that the offense underperformed last year, but the real frustration is that it underperformed while having this elite level pitching that was October ready and then some. So there's no doubt. Can the Mariners have a healthy rotation again, right? Can they be as effective as they were last year? I think you believe that they will be in the realm of effectiveness from last year. There's variance from year to year from every player, but I think we've seen enough from all 5 of those guys to know that they're among the best big league starting pitchers that the game has to offer. The health is the biggest question, and I think that's true for every team. I think when you're a baseball fan, it's so easy to get caught up in your own bubble of your own team and not look at the 29 other bubbles. And every team is hoping that. Every team on their whiteboard is saying, man, if this guy goes down for 50 games, what are we going to do? And the Mariners have that all over the place, right? If Cal Raleigh goes down, what are you going to do? You lose Julio, what are you going to do? And you pencil in, you circle 1 or 2 of those starting pitchers, and all of a sudden the trajectory of the team looks a lot different. Again, that's not Mariner Island. That's everywhere. Mm-hmm. And we just happen to be very familiar with it because it's the team that we watch every night. But yes, the rotation is, to call it special is an understatement. And we get spoiled by it. I know a couple times when we'd be watching, you go choose your random big league team, and they throw out their number 5 starter, right? And we go to commercial break, and I would say to Gary Hill, I would say, man, this is what they have to watch every 5 days, right? And we're not used to it because on the 5th day, we're watching Brian Wu throw 75 pitches to go 6 scoreless and give up 2 hits, right? I mean, it's just we're living on another planet, and we're pretty spoiled because of that.
Hey, what did you see in those 34 games out of Dan Wilson? I think that's such a huge thing for him to carry into this season. He got a chance he got thrown in the deep end, and all right, man, turn this thing around, do your best, and they did improve, and there were things I'm sure he learned along the way, and then he's going to apply it to, now he's got a full off season, he's got a full spring training to work with and get into the season. But what did you see? Did anything stand out in those 34 games that, I don't know, seemed really different than what we had been seeing with Scott Service, or what was your take on that?
I learned a number of things watching Dan for that roughly month to end the season. And it was a good teaching point for me as somebody who watches baseball for a living. And I learned a lot talking not only to Dan, but to people who were around Dan. And I'll start by saying I thought Scott Service was a very good manager for the Mariners. I thought Scott treated everyone very well, and I enjoyed my time working along Scott in my role. This is in no way any type of a knock on Scott Service. One of the things I learned about what it takes to be a big league manager is just what happens to the room when you walk in. And I know Dan Wilson really well, right? I've called 100 games on the broadcast with Dan over the years. And I can tell you, when Dan Wilson walks into the broadcast booth, like, you feel good about yourself.
Yeah.
You feel good about the day. Like, Dan makes the day better. And you can relate to that. Anybody who's spent even a microscopic amount of time with Dan Wilson understands that. And I'll tell you one other group that understands that, and that's the guys in the clubhouse. Everybody I've talked to, whether it be a player or a coach, a trainer, what have you, they all say that in some form or another about Dan Wilson. His ability to unify a room, unify a group, bring them together, and go for a common goal. Now, that might sound a little rah-rah to some people, but, I mean, that's the reality of the world that they live in. Dan brings people together, and when you want to be in the room with that guy, I think that goes a long way. Something else that really stands out to me, and I don't know to make this out to be something or not, but I remember we were in Houston, and I was in the clubhouse. The clubhouse was pretty empty because the hitters had their hitter meeting going on. Edgar was with the team, so he was running the hitters meeting. And I saw Dan pop out of his office. And I yelled down at Dan down the hallway, say, "Hey, Dan, you're missing the hitters meeting. It started 10 minutes ago." And he said, "I let Edgar handle that." And I kind of laughed it off in the moment, and then I started thinking about it more when I was walking back up to the booth. And what struck me is I think Dan's the type of guy who he understands what he understands. And he knows what Edgar Martinez's role was at the time for the ball club. And he knows that there's one thing he does not need to do, and that is be in that hitters meeting when the Hall of Fame hitter is instructing his hitters. His time was better served elsewhere. And I think that's the strength of Dan's. He knows where he's needed, and he knows where he's not needed. And there's something to be said for a really hands-on manager who wants to kind of put his toe in the water in all the different facets of the team. Like, I think there can be a positive to that. But I think there's also a positive to a guy who says, you know what, you're here for a reason. I handpicked you to be my hitting coach. Go be a hitting coach. I'm going to go figure out what I'm going to do in the 8th inning if we're up by a run. So I think that's another strength of Dan's, and I'm excited for him. I'm excited to see what a full season looks like for Dan Wilson, and I hope that he takes the Mariners all the way deep in October. What a legacy he would continue to forge for himself if he was able to do that.
If he's able to do that, there'll be another statue out in front of T-Mobile Park. It'll be of him. So, yeah, I'm pulling.
There's no question.
But you nailed it. He's impossible not to like, and he just puts a smile on your face. And if that transfers to the players, then maybe you see a little different outcome on the field. Let's hope for that. Goldie, great to catch up with you, man. Can't wait to get the season rolling. We'll see you out at spring training.
Hey, great to talk with you as well, man. We'll talk to you later.